So, the following program is brought to you by Haymarket Books. And at a time like this, radical ideas are obviously needed more than ever. And Haymarket, as well as producing these virtual events, brings out books by Arundhati Roy, Kianga Yamada Taylor, Angela Davis, Naomi Klein, and many other wonderful writers. And if you're moved by any of the program that you're about to see, you can support the work of Haymarket by buying their books from their own website. And even better, you can join the Haymarket Book Club.
Hello, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for joining us from around the world. We've got people from St. Louis and Harlem and Chicago, from Albuquerque, from Dallas, from the Bronx, from Melbourne. So we are so pleased to have you here. My name is Maya Marshall. I am a manuscript editor at Haymarket Books and a poet and writer. I'm hosting today's conversation and book launch of Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and Its Urgent Lessons of Our Own by Eddie S. Glaude Jr., published by Crown Books. Before I introduce Dr. Glaude and Dr. Cornel West, I want to thank the organizer of this teach-in, Haymarket Books. And I'd like to thank our book-selling partner, the terrific independent bookstore Labyrinth Books. To order Begin Again and other books by Dr. Glaude and Cornel West from Labyrinth, please visit labyrinthbooks.com and enter the discount code Baldwin at checkout to receive a free shipment of your order. Labyrinth will be donating 10% of sales generated by this event to the Poor People's Campaign. So buy those books, please, and let's support that work. Please allow a few days for fulfillment and about a week for arrival. It's critical that we support independent publishers and independent bookstores. And you can do this in three ways, among others. First, by buying books from places like Haymarket Books and by buying our speakers' books directly from Labyrinth. Second, by joining the Haymarket Books Book Club. And third, if you're in a position to make a donation, no matter how small, via Venmo, there will be a card on the screen about how to do this, and folks posting that information in the YouTube chat as well. The video will be recorded. This video will be recorded and shared afterwards, so you can watch it in perpetuity on our Haymarket Books YouTube channel. So please subscribe to that channel. And like this video now and share it with as many people as you can. Folks need to know about this good work. And I want to let everybody know about a couple of upcoming events and live streams that include tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern, the Abolish Policing, Not Just the Police talk, teach-in with Miriam Kaba, Maya Shinwar, and Victoria Law. This weekend, Haymarket is hosting a socialism conference on July 4th. There's more about that at haymarketbooks.org. On the 8th at 5 p.m. Eastern, you can join us for a conversation on policing without the police, race, technology, and the new Jim Code with Rua Benjamin and Dorothy Roberts. Please feel free to register for all of those events on Eventbrite. So a few housekeeping items. We're moderating the chat, but we can't guarantee that everyone will observe our community guidelines. And people who violate those guidelines will have their comments deleted as quickly as we're able. And for folks who want to follow the chat, we suggest you use the top chat option instead of the live chat option. Because there are so many of us joining this call, upwards of 9,000 it seems, we might need your patience if we have any tech problems. So if your stream gets choppy, try to reduce your image quality, and Haymarket's going to give instructions on how to do that in the chat. If our feed is interrupted for any reason, you can navigate back to the YouTube Haymarket page, and then it should resume without interruption. This event will have live closed captions, and to enable those captions, just click the CC button on the bottom of the video. If you're having any trouble with the closed captions, there will be a link in the chat to the raw caption feed for deaf and hard of hearing folks. Thank you to Maggie Rumfelt for live captioning this event. Thank you so much. I and the speakers will try to pace our speech with this in mind. And then, so what we'll do is we'll have a conversation with these brilliant humans for about 40 minutes. I'll interrupt, I'll ask a question, and give you a reminder about some events. And then we'll have a Q&A section. And now, so when you have questions for that, you'll just post them in the chat. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Glaude and Dr. West. Eddie S. Glaude Jr.'s most well-known books are Democracy in Black, How Race Still Enslaves the American Soul, and In a Shade of Blue, Pragmatism and the Politics of Black America. He is the William S. Todd Professor of Religion and African American, he's going to correct me in a second, African American Studies, and the Chair of the Department of African American Studies at Princeton University. If any of that has changed, you'll have to tell us. Dr. West is the Professor of the Practice of Public Philosophy at Harvard Divinity School. He is best known for his classics Race Matters and Democracy Matters, and his memoir, Brother West, Living and Loving Out Loud. He is the host with Trisha Rose of a new podcast, The Tightrope. They'll be discussing Dr. Glaude's important and beautifully written book, Begin Again, which was just released yesterday to well-deserved sales. Please add yourselves to that number. This book is absolutely beautiful. It's forcefully hopeful in a moment where we need that. I'm going to read just a little bit of where this book gets its name from, and then we'll start with why Baldwin, why now? Begin Again begins in a crucial and encouraging space. When the dream was slaughtered, and all that love and labor seemed to have come to nothing, we scattered. We knew where we had been, what we had tried to do, who had cracked, gone mad, died, or been murdered around us. Not everything is lost. Responsibility cannot be lost. It can only be abdicated. If one refuses abdication, one begins again. Welcome, Dr. Glaude.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I am so delighted to be here. Thank you, Maya.
So happy to have you and so excited to jump in with this question. Why? Why Baldwin and why now?
Well, we saw, first of all, just let me thank everybody for making this possible. All the folks at Haymarket Press, folk at Labyrinth. I want to specifically thank Dr. West, who has been so important in my life, who has exhibited a kind of love that has enveloped me, that has made me possible. And so this is making my heart smile just to be with you in this moment. So it's just exciting. I'm 51 years old and I'm still giddy, Doc. This is hilarious. It's hilarious. Why Baldwin? Why now? In some ways, we saw Baldwin emerge in the context of 2014 in some ways, and even before, as Black Lives Matter was beginning to give voice to its own desire for a more just America. They were reaching for Jimmy's voice. They were reaching for this queer Black man who spoke a kind of truth, straight no chaser, who carried with him and in his prose a kind of rage and love, right? Who queered African-American politics, who queered American politics, who offered, right, a different kind of understanding of what it meant to reach for a different way of being in the world. But I wanted to turn to Baldwin because I was trying to grapple with my own despair and disillusionment in this moment. So after the extraordinary moment of 2008 and the election of Barack Obama, and then we saw for 8 years what that meant. And then we witnessed police murdering our brothers and sisters. And we saw these young folk in the streets risking life and limb. And then what did we see in response? Voter ID laws, voter suppression, and in the country vomited up Donald Trump. And so this was a moment of betrayal, of profound betrayal. The country had did it again. And so what I wanted to do was to return to Jimmy, who had been invoked so much in this moment, to figure out how he dealt with his moment of betrayal when the country turned its back then. How did he pick up the pieces? And what resources were available to us now? Because he is, to my mind, one of the most insightful critics of American democracy that we've ever produced. And so it makes sense for me. It made sense for me to reach for him in this moment.
That makes perfect sense to me. Thank you for situating us in what this book is, which is part biography, part history, part historical grounding of this moment in the disappointment that followed the civil rights movement. And you've pointed again to the notion of hope and this practice of constant rebuilding. I wonder if each of you could take a moment to speak to the practice of hope and witness now, and our responsibility to care for the witness, right? We've seen some pretty nasty things happen to witnesses like Ramsey Orta or Darnella Frazier, who witnessed the murder of George Floyd for us and shared that information. How do we practice hope in the midst of the responsibility of witnessing? How do we take care of our witnesses?
I would love to hear what you think, Doc.
Oh, Lord. First, I want to thank Sister Myers just for her work there at Haymarket and the running of the poetry section and the manuscript section in general. They blessed to have you, my dear sister.
Thank you, good sir. Thank you.
Oh, indeed. And this brother right here, though, Lord have mercy. Just looking in his eyes and remembering 30 years ago, I was thoroughly convinced, sitting next to my dear brother Henry Louis Gates Jr., brother Skip. I said, you see that brother talking about Nietzsche and Afrocentrism? I say he's going to be one of the great exemplars of our tradition. And you see, you're talking about the greatest tradition in the modern world that looks at catastrophe unflinchingly and still dishes out love warriors. Lovers of beauty, lovers of goodness, lovers of truth. And for myself as a Christian, love of God. And those 30 years have been such a magnificent journey for me. So this is a very joyous occasion in the grim days of the decay and decline of the American empire. Be in dialogue, my dear brother Eddie. And see what you have in this text. And I want people to see what it looks like. See what it looks like. See what you have in this text is the way in which you attempt to regenerate and revitalize the greatness of a tradition of Black intellectuals or any intellectuals concerned about Black doings and suffering. So he begins with Baldwin talking about the end of his life. This is where hope comes from. I've tried to do my work, he says to my brother. I hope somebody will find when they dig in the wreckage and the rubbles and the ruins something that could be of use to them.
Yes.
To find the best of me. This is what we have in this text. That's why it really brings tears in one's eyes. You know, it's like hearing the sister saying Aretha. And lo and behold, she started taking it to a whole new level. Saying somebody listen to Mary Lou Williams on the piano like Jerry Allen and say, I'm going to take Mary Lou to places she doesn't do, but I can't exist without Mary. Well, see, Eddie Glaude is the exemplary figure among others as well. We got some others. I know we got Jonathan out there, and we got Mark, and we got William Hart, and old brother Dyson. As much as I'm going at that brother, he's part of that too. Imani Perry, of course, Farrah Griffin. We got a whole cloud of witnesses. of trying to keep this tradition alive. So Eddie Glaude represents the voices of a cloud of witnesses, a custodian of a rich inheritance, and a caretaker of a great tradition of a hated people that still keep dishing out these levels of truth and beauty. So this is why to engage with somebody like Baldwin, who exemplifies the highest levels of greatness. Greatness, not in terms of just sales. I'm so glad. I want the book to be #1. But the greatness of the text is not measured by just the numbers. It's measured by what went into it, the courage to think critically, the courage to love, and the courage to generate hope. And to practice hope is to be connected to the best of one's tradition, to understand what has gone into the making and molding, that Moss Point kind of love, all the way down in Gut Bucket, magnificent Mississippi. You see, that's what's in it. Look at that smile. Look at that smile. That's what's in it. And to make that tradition available to the whole world, because the whole world's dealing with levels of different catastrophe. And we as the people have been able to somehow keep it on, keep on pushing. And so that's what you actually get in Begin Again. And let's just be honest about it. It's a tear-soaked, blood-soaked, and yet soulful tradition. That's what you get in this text.
Absolutely. You know, Doc, first of all, I hope my mama's listening. That's what I want. I pray that she heard that, because that you're gonna bring me to tears. But there's a line there's so many lines in Jimmy that will blow you away. But there's a moment in Istanbul. He's being interviewed by Ebony, and he uses Begin Again, and Baldwin is sitting there, and it's 1970, I think. And the interviewer asks him, "What then about hope?" Because Baldwin retreats. This is on page 145 in the text.
I remember that.
Right. Remember, Baldwin retreats.
I remember exactly what he said. I remember what he said.
What did he say? What did he say?
He says, hope must be invented every day.
Every day.
Be invented every day. Is that right?
That's right.
Oh, you see, that's our tradition, brother.
That's our tradition.
That's our tradition there. Hope is not abstract. It's a verb. It's motion. It's movement. It's deed. It's praxis. And you got to be improvisational about it. You got to be jazz-like about it. You got to be blues-like about it. You better reinvent that thing every day. Good morning, heartache. I got to reinvent my fortifying resources to deal with that heartache, and it's going to come back the next day.
Exactly.
It's going to come back the next day. It's going to come back the next day. You get Billie Holiday echoing through with her genius, Baldwin right there. And the Baldwin, of course, he understands musicians mean the world to him.
Absolutely. But that's
yes.
So I was thinking about that line as an answer to Maya. In the face of the assassination of Dr. King, where they murdered an apostle of love, and Jimmy collapses, could barely pick up the pieces, tries to commit suicide in 1969, has to find, relationships collapsing around him, still thinks he's this loveless child who's ugly because his daddy told him he was so ugly that he then believed that nobody could love that ugly little boy. Finds himself in Istanbul trying to figure out how to speak to this moment. And there he gives utterance to this line, this formulation that Doc just laid out. Hope is invented every day.
Every day.
No, that's real though, brother.
What a necessary practice. What a necessary practice that we, in fact, are the hope. It is our commitment to showing up. That is the hope. That is the model. That is the practice of witness. And he was just so right so often, even in the midst of
Sister Maya, all the courage and risk and willingness to be crushed and misunderstood and misconstrued and thoroughly pushed to the fringes and still have that kind of bounce back. See,
that's it.
the raw
That's
stuff.
it.
You see what I mean?
That's
The
it.
raw stuff, you see. So that, what we have in Brother Eddie's book here in the middle of a blues-like situation in the U.S. empire, he's saying, well, we blues people, this ain't new for us. We've been here before. Not this particular historical moment, but similar kinds of moments. And it's a human thing. It's not just a black thing, because black folk are human beings, presuppose, assume, don't have to prove nothing to nobody.
That's
and
right.
yet we
right.
still have to learn how to love and fight and hope and laugh in our families with our mamas and our daddies in our mosques and our temples and our synagogues and our churches in our universities. Eddie working that out at Princeton. Ooh, now Princeton didn't have in mind
No.
a genius from Moss Point, Mississippi, to be distinguished university professor. Now, Jeff Stout is not surprised. He's our fellow colleague and teacher. I'm not surprised. Albert Roberto's not surprised. We got teachers and those who see us as we continue to grow and mature. We're not surprised. But then the fact that he's still, like Baldwin, is connected to the best of his tradition, though. You see, that's the thing about it. That that other moment at Howard, though, you probably won't say a little word when he tells the students. I won't say what he tells. No, you tell him. You tell that story, brother.
No, it's a gorgeous moment, right? They NAG, Nonviolent Action Group, who were so central to SNCC. They produced that radical cohort. In that group is Muriel Tillingast and Cortland Cox and Stokely Carmichael, who would become Kwame Ture, Michael Thelwell. They all come out of that group. So they invite him to come to campus. He's supposed to be on stage with Ralph Ellison, who couldn't make it, Lorraine, who was too sick, Ozzie Davis and others, and he lays bare. But then they retreat after the panel discussion. Malcolm was in that audience too. Say, whenever I'm in town and I hear this little brother's going to speak, I want to come hear him because I know he's going to speak the truth. They go to the apartment complex, the apartment of one of the NAG members, and it's late night. Jimmy needs a scotch. There's no liquor. Somebody knows a bootlegger. So they get the liquor, and they're talking until the late midnight hour till the sun begins to come up. And then Baldwin has the last word. And Jimmy said, if you promise your elder brother that you will not believe what the world says about you, I will promise you that I will never betray you. And Kwame Ture tells Michael Thelwell in his autobiography, and Thelwell quotes it, and Jimmy never betrayed us, no matter what they said about us. Never betrayed us.
Now, I was sitting next to Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture at the funeral, December 1987, St. John's Cathedral, when a genius named Baraka and another genius named Toni Morrison gave their hearts, minds, and soul, and Stokely cried like a baby. I've traveled with Stokely, and he's not in the crying kind of, he ain't crying kind of brother. Because he knew that given all the faults and foibles of all of us as human beings, Baldwin never sold out. He was never fake. He was never a phony. He was never a fraud. He was never a coward. Given all of his ups and downs. I mean, 2 suicide attempts, right?
55 and 69, yeah, absolutely.
You see, he's wrestling with despair. That's true for all of us. All of us may not opt for that particular way of wrestling with it, but he's wrestling with despair. But he never betrayed everyday black people, or really everyday people, you see. And that's a rare thing. It's a beautiful thing. It's majestic. It's sublime, actually. And you're able to tease that out. This is why this is the most important text ever written on Baldwin in terms of his genius and his relevance. Now, Brother Ed's Publix check on Baldwin and the blues, I love. That connection to the music is powerful. But in terms of the relevance to this particular historical moment, politically, morally, and spiritually,
this one.
This is the text.
Oh,
This
thank you.
is the
Thank you.
one. Absolutely.
Yeah, you have made it abundantly clear that James Baldwin was a man who looked first into the faces of his own demons in order to be honest with himself, because he was a person who believed you made yourself from your experiences, from your reality, and that maybe you could give yourself some distance to get the perspective, but that you had to come back and show up for your people and for where you're from and for yourself. And that's abundantly clear throughout the text.
Yeah, Maya, it's such a great point. I barely survived writing the book.
Mm-hmm.
Because I wanted to come in. I'm reading. Jimmy. I've always had this kind of, I knew when I decided to start reading him seriously that he was going to ask things of me that I wasn't quite ready for when I was younger, right? And there's a sense in which Baldwin always assumes this as a precondition to say anything about the messiness of the world. You got to deal with your own mess. So you got to deal with the interior wounds and pains as a precondition to say anything about the world. Because Baldwin thinks that the messiness of the world is actually a reflection of the lies and dishonesty that we tell ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sitting here wanting to write about Trumpism in the moment, and I'm grappling with the fact that I'm a vulnerable little boy, still dealing with my daddy issues, still grappling with the fact that he could just, and that's why I began this way.
Mm-hmm.
My father, I love my father. It's Black love. He made me possible. Woke up every day in the Mississippi heat, used to sweat his belts rotten in the Mississippi heat, delivering mail. But he could look at me and scare me to death. I would shudder. And I've been grappling with what it means to have that fear put inside of me so early. And as I was writing, the sentence just came out, right, about me dealing with my daddy.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time I get to the end of the novel, end of the book, my father is with me as I visit Jimmy's grave. And I'm talking about how us telling each other how we love each other, how he's calling me to tell me what to say on television, and how proud he is of me and the like, right? And when you read Jimmy, you read Baldwin Notes of a Native Son, his critique of his stepfather is scathing. But you read Baldwin by the time he's about to die in December, the later writings about his father, he understands what the world did to him.
Mm-hmm.
It's not so much him, but the context of his living. So I think the writing of Begin Again is a kind of writing that I've never done in public before. I'm taking risks because Jimmy demanded it of me. And I should say this really quickly. He forced me to deal with the scaffolding of my own lives.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. He's asking that of our country and as well, right? Of those of us who are trying to pull the nation back from the neo-fascist moment, to be honest with ourselves, because narratives are important. So if you take a moment to speak to your definition of both the lie, as you talk about it in the book, and the notion of the value gap, resolving those things, I would love to hear the two of you discuss that.
Well, the best way to talk about the lie is to quote a passage on page 9. It's from Jimmy's essay, 1964 essay, The White Problem. He wrote it for Robert A. Goodwin's edited volume, 100 Years of Emancipation. And it reads, the people who settled the country had a fatal flaw. They could recognize a man when they saw one. They knew he wasn't anything else but a man. But since they were Christian, and since they had already decided that they came here to establish a free country, the only way to justify the role this chattel was playing in one's life was to say that he was not a man. Or if he wasn't, then no crime had been committed. That lie is the basis of our present trouble. And so what Baldwin is saying here at the heart of it is that there have been lies told about Black people's capacities, about our character, about our passions, all to justify right? This system of exploitation, this system, this cruel, barbaric system of slavery that is at the heart of the founding of the modern world, right? At the heart of the founding of the country. And so not only do you have lies about Black people, you have lies about what white Americans have done to Black people. And then you have the lie that's so, this is the key point. There's a way in which the lie works that it malforms, I use that verb on purpose. It malforms any effort to expose the country to the reality of what it has done. So anything that comes to reveal the truth of what the nation has done, right? What it has done to the native peoples, what it has done in Haiti and Cuba and the Philippines, what it has done in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, anything that actually reveals that America is not the shining city on the hill or the Redeemer nation or the example of democracy achieved, right? Anything that attempts to reveal that reality is immediately dismissed as heresy.
Absolutely.
Delegitimized from the beginning, you know? But anyway, that's what I mean by the lie. And that lie is the architecture within which the value gap breathes. And the value gap is this fundamental belief that white people matter more than others. And that's at the heart of it. It's at the heart of our social arrangements, our political arrangements, our economic arrangements. It's a valuation of Black folk and a valuation of white folk that lead to the distribution of advantage and disadvantage that distorts the character of these folk who hold it, so they can't even become the kinds of people their conception of democracy requires.
Absolutely. It sounds to me what you're saying is that the key tool we have to fighting that foundational fear that Audre Lorde says we're born with is to have a true reality, a sense of who we actually are, that we in fact are human without having to ask, that we are equal, that we are as important, that we are deserving of love, that we are not ugly, right? That's the sort of crucial truth we have to hold in our hearts in order to fight the fear that enters immediately at the beginning of our breath. I'm going to read just a little passage from the book and then ask you one more question about this notion of innocence. But the lie's most pernicious effect when it comes to our history is the malform events to fit the story whenever America's innocence is threatened by reality. When measured against our actions, the story we have told ourselves about America being a divinely sanctioned nation, called to be a beacon of light and a moral force in the world, is a lie. The idea of the lost cause as just an honest assessment of what happened after the Civil War is a lie. The stories we often tell ourselves of the civil rights movement and racial progress in this country, with Rosa Parks' courage and Dr. King's moral vision and the unreasonable venom of Black power culminating in the election of Barack Obama, are all too often lies. So I wonder, what could we gain if we disabused ourselves of the notion of innocence as it relates to the citizenry and the state?
Oh, on one level, we could leave behind the swaddling clothing. we can become mature. We can grow up. The lie keeps us in Never Never Land. Perpetual state of adolescence, so you don't have to be responsible for anything. Right? The lie allows us to exist in a kind of willful ignorance about what we have done and what we're doing. Remember that moment in Fire Next Time in '63? Right? When he talks about what is happening to Black folk, he says, it's not just that line that is echoed in that, what's that movie with the late brother with Ice Cube and where he said they don't know, either they don't know or they don't show. Remember that movie? Boys in the Hood.
Oh, the
right?
great John Singleton.
John Singleton,
yes.
right? It's not just simply if they don't know or they don't show. Remember that line? And what he's saying is it's not that they don't know. They willfully don't want to acknowledge what they're doing to millions of their fellows, right? And Baldwin says it's not enough that you can do that, and then claim innocence. Innocence is the crime.
Yes.
Innocence is the crime.
Right.
But I think once we leave that behind, we're stepping into maturity.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Right. That's why I went to Corinthians. But anyway.
Yeah, but for me, see, part of the greatness of Baldwin is that he also knows how thick white supremacy is in the souls of black people.
For real. Right.
That the lie has been something that too many black people have consented to. So if you really believe you're less beautiful, less intelligent, less moral, if you run around scared, intimidated, and fearful all the time, and laughing when it ain't funny, and scratching when it don't itch, you're just gonna wear a mask your whole life. So Baldwin says the only thing that can break the back of fear is love. See, love of beauty will break it. Listen to the dramatics. You listen to the emotions. You listen to Coltrane. You got the pursuance in there twice. He's got the reference to that third part of a love supreme.
Yeah,
Jimmy on the drums, and then Jimmy takes over on the bass. Then McCoy comes on the piano, then Jimmy on the bass. Then Train takes it off, and then they're off the song. That is the stuff that can break the back of fear, because fear is something that all human beings have to come to terms with. I mean, Audre Lorde, as Sister Maya pointed out, she understood that well. Lorraine Hansberry understood that well in Raise It in the Sun. People are fearful. The only way you grow into maturity is through a sense of history, your sense of memory, and the love that went into you that empowers you to break the kinds of anxieties that don't allow you to be the free person you ought to be. And Brother Eddie lays this out. Love forces us to take off the mask we know.
Right.
Did not live within, but fear we cannot live without. You got to break it out.
That's right.
You got Muhammad Ali and Nina Simone. These are free black people.
Yes.
And Baldwin was part of that cloud of witnesses, and Brother Eddie. Now, see, Eddie putting more responsibility on himself now, because Baldwin, of course, was someone who was chewed up and spit out by the liberal establishment. That's why Brother Eddie argues No Name in the Street is a classic. Brother Skip, we love Skip. Brother Hilton, we love Hilton. They wrong. They say Baldwin was great in Fire Next Time, and by No Name in the Street, he had lost his literary power. He was bitter. He was enraged. No, reread Glaude and get straightened out. There is a genius in Baldwin after the deaths of Malcolm and Martin and Metcalfe. There's a genius in Baldwin where the only thing he can fall back on is the love of his family, Mahalia Jackson, Ray Charles, and others, because as he got closer to death, which is true for all of us, that those things that really, really, really matter that can sustain you, that's what you're going to fall back on.
Absolutely.
It's going to be grandmama and granddaddy and your kids and your friends and your partners and your intellectual ancestors, like that we get involved with. Brother Eddie lays this out.
He sure does. You know, Baldwin never stopped telling the truth, even when it seemed that he was fully disheartened. You know, Dr. Glaude points out a reading or a passage in that first couple of sections that could be read as saying, "Oh, Baldwin gave up." But what he did is he gave a framework for old age, right? Which is not something we introduce to our young activists or talk about much at school. We talked earlier about recursiveness, about, you know, a Love Supreme, having that third movement where you sort of rehear the melody, even though he's, you know, doing more for dissonance in order to show the beauty and the destruction in the lyric, right? Like, that's important. I want to turn to this idea that Dr. Glaude points out in the book of trauma memory, right? Where that sort of riffing comes out.
Yeah.
Because you didn't stop saying the same facts. You just had a different perspective, a new lens that comes with age and that comes with devastation, right?
Yeah, you know,
Very true.
I try to say that, you know, I think, you know, the scholarship around Jimmy is much more articulated and it's just amazing to see the work with the James Baldwin Review, with Dwight McBride and others. So the traditional reading of old Baldwin, early Baldwin, late Baldwin, folk don't really buy into that anymore. That silly biography by James Campbell has been kind of displaced by others who have been working in Jimmy's work. But I want to hold on to this claim that there's a continuity of theme running through Jimmy, that he's grappling with ideas under different material conditions that change how he's thinking about love, identity, history, memory, right? How he's thinking about white supremacy and the like. So it's not that he goes bad in the teeth or he succumbs to the propaganda of Black power or he seeks only a kind of continued relevance after he's fallen out of celebrity, as it were. No, he's grappling with the conditions under which Black folk have to live and the conditions under which love has to be expressed. That's why I think somebody has to really grapple with the evidence of things not seen, right? When he's writing about the Atlanta child murders and he's trying to figure out what are we dealing with when these Black babies are being killed and we got all these Black folk in power. How are we going to grapple with this, right? The book needed a good editing, but it's a brilliant text that requires a different kind of reading. But I think, though, that trauma is at the heart of how we think about reading Jimmy in this latter phase, right? How he's grappling with and narrating trauma. There's a line I want to get to in the witness chapter, and I remember writing this my Corn and trying to figure out. I got up after I wrote it and poured myself a stiff drink because I knew something had just happened. And it goes something like this: narrating trauma. This is on 41. Narrating trauma fragments how we remember. We recall what we can and what we desperately need to keep ourselves together. Wounds, historical and painfully present, threaten to rend the soul, and if that happens, nothing else matters. Telling the story of trauma in fits and starts isn't history in any formal sense. It is the way traumatic memory works, recollections caught in the pitch of battle between remembering and forgetting. That's Tony right there.
Yes,
Facts bungled on behalf of much needed truths. We try to keep our heads above water and tell ourselves a story that keeps our legs and arms moving below the surface. And then I go on page 43 and I say, terror cannot.
On page 43 and 44.
Yeah, 43 and
41. We want everybody to know to read those powerful words. Page 43 and then 44.
I don't have my glasses on.
I had to take mine off to check it out too. But
so that's 43 and 44. And then that's on 45, right. I quote this passage. Terror cannot be remembered. One blots it out. The organism, the human being, blots it out. One invents or creates a personality or a persona beneath this accumulation rock of ages. Sleeps or hopes to sleep, that terror which the memory repudiates. And then I said the cruel irony, of course, is that the terrors move us about. We dig trenches to redirect the memories and to get them to flow away from us. But like the waters of the Mississippi River, the memories always return, flooding everything, no matter how high we build the stilts. Right. So I think at the end, Baldwin is trying to, in the latter part of his career, trying to tell the story of what happened, right? And trying to offer a language that will allow us, right, to pick up the pieces and move forward. You cannot understand, to my mind, you cannot understand what Tony is doing with Memory and Beloved and not understand what Baldwin is doing with Memory and No Name in the Street. Structurally, it's almost, right, they're echoing each other in these extraordinarily beautiful ways. Memory turning back on itself, anything triggering the return, the way he misremembers Dorothy counts. Much is blotted out. The mind is a strange thing. He's dealing with he was on the verge of madness in the face of it all.
Yes.
And you're going to dismiss that, Doc? You're going to dismiss that?
That's rich. But back to Maya's reading, though, at the very beginning of our dialogue, where right before you talk about beginning again, you were talking about what is not lost. And what is not lost is responsibility. Responding, an ability to respond, accountability, accounting of oneself, accounting of one's community, accounting of one's society and the world, answerability. You know, that's Brother Jeff's favorite. One of his favorite words, right?
Yeah, it is.
With Brando. We have to be able to answer one another. And you see, Baldwin gets this in black music. You see that the musicians must take responsibility for the notes they play, right or wrong. Responsibility for the sound, responsibility for the impact on the audience. Are you going to touch the souls of the folk to enable them in such a way that they can be agents of love and hope? And I think Baldwin understood, and Brother Eddie lays this out so magnificently, that the black intellectual ought to be like the black musician. See, when black folks see the black musician, they say, that's somebody who will more likely empower me if they sing in the right key and know how to play.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas black intellectuals don't have that status. Black intellectuals, oh no, here comes another arrogant so-and-so looking down on everyday people, thinking they better than, uppity, and so forth and so on. You see, no. If the black intellectuals had the same status as the black musicians, they would be looking for us. Oh, we hungry for more narratives. We hungry for more poetry. We want Haki. We want Gwendolyn. We want the last poet. We want Gil Scott. We go on and on.
Yes. So let me make this argument that the poets are black intellectuals.
Oh,
that
absolutely. Absolutely. That's true.
That are Lucille
so are the musicians.
She says,
so are
absolutely.
The musicians.
Absolutely.
But the gap, though, Sister Maya, between the intellectuals in the academy versus the musicians is still a gap there.
But the bridge then is the poets who are in the academy and moving with music.
Moving back and forth. No, I hear you.
I hear you.
Absolutely. I mean, Brother Eddie knows that, part of my critique of Baldwin, because I'm always suspicious of any revival of these folks. There's a lot of big revival of Baldwin, you know what I mean? And we appreciate Baldwin is unbelievable, and I've been critical of Brother Coates, and I love the brother. His voice is very important and so forth and so on. But that was generated by his relation to Brother James Baldwin, because Baldwin's the highest standard. There's very, very, very few Baldwins any 2 or 3 generations, let alone one. But the voices are very important, no matter who, including Coates. But my critique is, and Brother Eddie, we talk about this with Mark and Pete and Chuck and the others, that Baldwin doesn't linger with his critique of the worst of the black bourgeoisie. His critique of white liberals is devastating. His critique of black liberals, underdeveloped. It's there, but he doesn't really sustain it. It's not an E. Franklin Fraser indictment of the black bourgeoisie in 1955. And you see, in the post-Obama era that we live in, we've got to have a bold critique of the worst of the black bourgeoisie that has, in fact, too often turned its back to the black poor and black working class. Now, with the best of the black bourgeoisie, it's beautiful. But Baldwin tends to be reluctant, it seems to me. Is that fair or unfair? What you think, though, brother?
I think this is why we need to return to the evidence of things not seen.
The Atlanta situation.
Yeah, because I think this is precisely the moment that you're looking for. Okay, because Baldwin, what happens when white supremacy still obtains and black folk have power? What are we to make of Atlanta, this representation of the very class that you're talking about? So white folk aren't the object in the object of consideration in evidence of things not seen. Right? White supremacy. Right. He makes that wonderful distinction between white people and people who happen to be white, which I love. Right? Yeah. Trying to get us to pay attention to the ideology of whiteness. But the object of that critique is the way in which power functions and the way in which capitalism functions and what happens when we get access to it. And white supremacy still obtains. And because the book is often, I remember when I interviewed Michael Thelwell for the book, I said, we got to return to evidence of things not seen. And Thelwell said, oh, hell no. He was like, nah, he just wrote that. It was too quick. Jimmy probably was drunk when he wrote that, Eddie. I was like, but that probably, but that doesn't really lead us to the judgment of the text. But I think the general dismissal of that book cuts it off. I think it needs to be because we don't read it because it's not in the price of the ticket. We don't read it because it's not in the Library of America collection. So it kind of dangles out there. And I think that's exactly where we would look for that critique you're looking for.
Because what happens is the black intelligentsia gets so disarmed in the age of Obama. So that we didn't have enough critical voices telling the truth about the connections to Wall Street and drones and empire and so forth. Everybody wanted to protect him. Well, black unity is a beautiful thing. Black solidarity is different. See, black solidarity means you put a primacy on the least of these. I go biblical. The poor, the working classes, the widows, the fatherless, not just the highly successful ones who are doing well. They're not the measure of how black people are doing.
You are absolutely right.
You see what I mean? So
you're right. And I want to ask before we pivot, because we're about to move to this part where the questions come. In addition to people like Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor, who did critique Obama, and who are critiquing.
Taylor's strong. She's still as strong as can be.
Isn't she?
At Princeton too. What's going on at Princeton?
Wildly, I'm wildly proud of her. But I want to ask one more question with this framework that Dr. West has provided to us before we transition to the questions from the audience. So, can you speak to the possibility of genuinely multiracial democracy while capitalism persists?
Doc, you want to take that, or you want?
I got a whole lot to say, but you go and break loose on that one, my brother.
Of course. I mean, we have to freedom dream, right? I think there's a possibility for a multiracial coalition to speak to the contradictions of capitalism in this moment. But I don't. As long as capitalism obtains, there's going to be the view that some people are disposable. It seems to me.
Works in tandem with white supremacy in that way.
Well, racial capitalism is what it is, right? And so but that doesn't preclude, because if I understand the question, it doesn't preclude the possibility of multiracial coalition to actually strike the blow to what capitalism is all, because the contradictions are in full view. Mm-hmm. One of the interesting things about this current moment is that the last 40 to 50 years of Reaganism, right, it's being revealed to be bankrupt.
Right, that's right.
All of its contradictions are in full view, and so part of what we're seeing in the streets are, young folk who've come of age in the age of catastrophe or accumulated grief and the like. You see folk protesting over police brutality and the like. You see a kind of solidarity and vulnerability that the pandemic has generated. But the idea underneath it all, or at least the judgment underneath it all, is that the country is broken. Right. And that's why we see all of these different groups and coalitions out in the streets risking their lives, we must say, because they are risking their lives. So my short answer to the question is yes, I believe that in the possibility of multiracial coalitions in the face of capital. Cornel, does that make sense?
Oh no, well, you got to have solidarity and coalitions based on deep integrity and willingness to fight for poor people, beginning with people of color, not just black people. Original sin of America is not slavery, it's the treatment of indigenous people. America begins as an empire, it doesn't begin as a democratic experiment. Mm-hmm. The democratic experiment within the bowels of the empire itself, predicated on black folks' labor and vicious hatred of black people. But yes, we got to have multiracial coalitions. There's just no doubt about that. It just have to make sure all those coalitions have to be unapologetic about fighting white supremacy and male supremacy and transphobia and homophobia and so forth. Yes. But at the same time, Baldwin himself talked about the American style of socialism. You got
absolutely Yankee Doodle socialism.
Yankee Doodle, talking with Bobby Seale and the others.
Exactly.
Absolutely, he began as a Trotskyite when he was young.
Exactly.
Very, very much so. And empire. I mean, here, with Juma Baraka and Glenn Ford and all of our leftist folk, they keep the pressure on. America is an empire and a predatory capitalist civilization, and profoundly white supremacy at its core, profoundly male supremacy at its core, with its transphobia and homophobia. But within that same experiment, there have been freedom fighters and love warriors coming out of a variety of different traditions. It's just that black folk, we culturally and artistically have actually been in the vanguard of it.
Yep. I don't mean to set up that question as though it is an opposition. I mean to continue with this that all of those coalitions must be honest and evaluated critically and honestly, the Black liberal as well as the like toting leftist, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for answering that question. Yeah. Before we make this transition to audience questions, are there thoughts you want to share?
You know, I always thought that Jimmy was walking with me as I wrote the book. I didn't tell you this story, Doc, but as I was writing the book, Reverend Barber, I talked to Reverend Barber, and he was, that's why y'all need to buy the book, not to buy the book, but in order to get some money to the Poor People's Campaign. But Reverend Barber said, you need to write this book, Brother Eddie. You need to write it. We need this book. We need you, right? And then all of a sudden, a few weeks later, I get this package in the mail. And Reverend Barber sent me a candle.
Yeah.
Oh. Wow.
Jimmy. And, you know, and then there were these moments, you know, it's like when Fern Margie Ekman, who wrote the first biography of Jimmy in 1966, wrote The Furious Passage. And there are all of these amazing quotes in that biography. And I remember saying, boy, I wish I could find the archive of these quotations. And Imani Perry, who's my writing partner, was like, well, why don't you call? I said, Fern Margie Ekman got to be like 100 years old. And she said, and of course, given what Dr. Perry is, she sent me all of these telephone numbers via email. So I called the first number. Lo and behold, Fern Margie Ekman is alive. I go to the apartment in New York and I meet her niece, and the niece says the tapes are lost, but I got the transcripts. And I'm reading, and it wasn't like 5 to 10 pages, it's 100 pages of transcription of the interviews. So Baldwin's description of witness that isn't in Furious Passage, I found in that space. Jimmy like sent me to it, right? Or the moment when I wanted to visit his grave at the end with Carol Weinstein.
Yeah.
And Carol Weinstein, who's the partner of David Baldwin, they have a beautiful son together, Daniel Baldwin. Carol drives me to the graveyard, the grave site, and we think we're gonna find him, and we're walking all around, and these brothers, they're young brothers, right, millennials, Gen Zers, and they smoking woos, they getting zooted. I'm dating myself. They getting high, right? And rolled down the window, Doc, and the weed, it was loud. The weed just came in strong. And you know, we asked him, I write about this at the end of the book. We said, yo, do you know where James Baldwin's grave is? Brother turns around and he says, no, we don't know, but he might be buried near Malcolm, and Malcolm is over there. And Carol says, nah, he's not buried near Malcolm. So then we would return. I find Jimmy, and he's right behind the young folk. In plain sight, bruh. Waiting for us.
Wow.
Waiting
for us. And
that's the conclusion I draw. He's been waiting to see what this history will do for us, and he still waits.
Thank you.
Digging in the wreckage.
The ruins.
Digging in the wreckage. I mean, the third American founding that you talk about in the last pages of the text, very similar in some ways to what Brother Barber talks about in Third Reconstruction.
Exactly.
To begin anew means a massive, radical, democratic awakening. Keep track of all of the various forms of domination and various forms of evil in the American empire. Brother, this is a text that is timely and will be timeless in terms of folk who will be reading it many, many years after the worms have our bodies. I could tell you that.
And Sister Maya, let me say this before we turn to the questions. Doc talked about the love. This man has loved me to death. And without his love and example, none of this would be possible. He loved me into understanding that this country boy from Mississippi could say something in the world. Gave me the authority to believe in myself and to understand that I had the capacity to think with anybody, to walk in any room, to be a free Black man, and to understand what it means to walk in love. So He poured all this love in me, and I just want to give him all the glory. Not all the glory, because it goes to God, but all.
Lord, brother, you give me so much joy. And my godson, Langston, that's one of the great honors of my life. His son's my godson. Sister Winnie, I'm hugging her virtually. Can't get to her physically. But also your parents, your mom and dad down in Mississippi, man, and they were it's just such a blessing to be part of a great tradition, knowing that you holding up that bloodstained, tear-soaked banner in such a way that the self-examination goes hand in hand with the fortitude, with the determination to keep on fighting, keep on swinging.
This is so beautiful.
Brother Eddie Glaude, Jr.
What a beautiful exchange. Thank you so much for allowing me to be witness to that. I'm so grateful you were able to be loved into the best version of yourself.
Thank you.
And that you would share that with me and with us. Man, I feel bad giving a pitch now, but all right. Before we begin the audience questions, I want to remind everyone about this book, Begin Again, which you can buy from Labyrinth for free shipping if you put in that Baldwin code. And also 10% of those sales go to the Poor People's Campaign. And that's like work we need to be doing. So please do pick up this book that is guiding the young people who need to know about Baldwin into this future that we are going to fight for together. So do that. And also register for these upcoming events, one with Mariam Kaba, Maya Shenwar, and Victoria Law tomorrow. That's the 2nd. And then another with Rua Benjamin and Dorothy Roberts on the 8th. You can register on Eventbrite. Also, Haymarket is hosting the Socialism Conference on the 4th of July. All right.
That's wonderful.
We do it every year. It's a perfect timing. So from Tusker, we've got what lesser-known Black voices and other voices of color can the two of you recommend to the audience for study and guidance, whether historical or present?
Who comes to mind for you, Doc?
I would begin with this magisterial text just published by my dear sister Carrie Kindred, on William Monroe Trotter, Black radical. Went up against Booker T. Washington, went up against W.B. Du Bois, ended up working closely with the young socialists, A. Philip Randolph, with FBI hunting him down, stayed in the basement of William Monroe Trotter in Boston. Now, 62 years old, he committed suicide, jumped off the top of the building because he felt, in fact, that Black folk had turned their backs on him. He was the editor of The Guardian. But his life is exemplary, and Professor Kendrick, Sister Kendrick's, Carrie's book, it really allows his voice to become much more visible. And he's in the same tradition as Baldwin, as Lorraine Hansberry, as Eddie Glaude Jr., and all the rest of it. Oh, yeah.
I'm going to let that one stand like that. We can go to the next one, if that's good. Read some Alice Childress, that'll help.
Oh, that's true.
That's a good jumping off point. From Laura Sullivan, how do we deal with neoliberalism's patterns of commodifying, appropriating, and affectively manipulating radical discourses, practices, and emotions? You can take a moment to sit with that.
Yeah, no, I think we have to, how can I put this? And this is going to sound a bit too abstract. But I think we have to figure out how to be together differently under these contemporary under the contemporary material conditions, right? So how do we resist the way in which neoliberalism reduces us to being individuals in pursuit of our own self-interest, in competition and rivalry with other individuals in pursuit of their own self-interest, right? And because we're individuals in pursuit of our own self-interest, and competition and rivalry are the basic values that define that, right? It eviscerates any notion of the public good, right? This is why you got folk can't understand why they cannot wear masks, right? They have no conception of what a robust understanding of standing in relation with others in genuine community. So part of what we have to do, it seems to me, is to figure out how to build relationships with one another, right? That in some ways hold off that model, that way of being in the world, right? Build communities of love that allow you to laugh full belly laughs, to be rageful, right? Those folk who will enable you, right, to reach for a different way of being in the world, right? And I'm not trying to sound like Alistair McIntyre, Doc, and talking about creating these little pockets where you can go off and run away from modernity. But I am saying that how we forge relationships with one another becomes an active political gesture in this moment, it seems to me. Does that make sense, Doc, or is that too?
Oh, absolutely. And the joy that you have in those relationships have to be deeper than the pleasure you get in other corners of the world, in other corners of the community. See, joy is something qualitatively different than pleasure. Black people traditionally have been a soulful people because we've been a joyful people. You can't be soulful if your whole life is just about pleasure. You see? See, it's joy and pain. That's the genius of Frankie Beverly and Mays. It ain't pleasure and something else. But the tradition that they come from, it has to cut at that deeper spiritual and moral level. And we have to be honest. We have to realize all of us, especially those of us in the Black middle class, are always already commodified in one way or another. And that has to be the object of our critical reflection. It's like Baldwin and No Name in the Street. He says, I know I'm the great white hope for the liberal establishment. I want to talk about that. I'm not going to be that hope for them. Now, that doesn't mean white folk. It doesn't mean he's just kowtowing the black folk. He got something inside of him that's called a calling, not just a career. He got something inside of him called a cause, not just a brand. And I need to say that now in a highly commodified culture. Everybody can't wait to have a brand. Can't wait to have their brand. They missing the point. That's a key sweat moment. Something just ain't right. Something just ain't right. That's what Mama tells Walter in A Raisin in the Sun, right? We used to talk about freedom. Now all we talking about is money. And what did Jimmy say about Sweet Lorraine? Imani's got it in her text. The difference between pull that, yeah, we can see that. Pull that genius right there from Chicago. Whoa, look in those eyes. And what did Jimmy say about that genius? Jimmy said she understood the difference between keeping the faith and making it. Everybody got to, in some sense, make it because you got to have cash. You don't live by bread alone. You got to keep the faith. Whatever faith it is, whatever faith it is, it's got to be a faith bigger than your ego, bigger than your narcissism, bigger than your career, bigger than your opportunism, bigger than your next PR move. You got to have something inside of you. And with Brother Eddie Glaude, he got something inside of him that he had before I even set eyes on him.
It's integrity and empathy.
Absolutely. That's Morehouse as well as Mississippi. I'm going to give Morehouse some credit here. That's Morehouse too.
I'm going to ask a little follow-up because this moment is particularly unusual, that we're asking for deep, useful, productive connection in a moment where we are not safe with active, close physical intimacy because of a pandemic. How do we build real closeness in a digital era, when we're sort of trapped on platforms that are capitalist projects and that are, fast forms of the kind of developed relationships or community-based ties that we would make in person otherwise?
Yeah, that's a hard question.
Well, that's a profound question. You asked me all profound questions tonight.
Yeah, that's a hard question, Maya. It's, I'm thinking about Wilna Julmist, Wilna Julmist, Paul Taylor's wife, his partner. She lost her mama to COVID-19. And she couldn't go home to say goodbye to her. Couldn't send her home right because she was worried about coronavirus and her children. And you think about Wynton Marsalis and his daddy. As complicated as that relationship.
Oh yeah, Brother Ellis, we love him. Never forget him.
They couldn't do a second line for him in New Orleans. Can you imagine that? They couldn't send him home right. So there are ways in which this current pandemic has interrupted touch, has given grief a different sort of register. It gives it an edge, because grief now comes with regret, and grief and regret is dangerous, right? Mama, I wish I could have said to you that I was sorry before you went away. I wish I could have resolved X, Y, and Z. And so that's happening alongside of the fact that we are sheltering in place, and many of us are, and we can't touch, we can't engage. But I think they're in the midst of this. So I'm trying to get to an answer to your question, is that in the midst of this, we have to find ways of being together.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm in a reading group with Doc.
Yep.
Oh, we have a good time too.
In the midst of all of this stuff, and you and I don't have time to even blink, but we sitting here reading, and for every 2 weeks we getting on Zoom, and for 2 hours with our close partners Mark Jefferson and Paul Taylor and Charles Peterson and Charles McKinney, and we just talking about the book.
Yeah.
And there might be a little liquor flowing, but the point is that we're trying to figure out how to maintain each other's soul, how to be not a crutch, but a shoulder
Mm-hmm.
in the midst of this, you know. And so how are we going to be coming on the opposite end of this, you know? The way in which we're trying to continue community and stand in right relation with each other under these conditions, what it will look like when we get on the other side of this might just be even deeper, if that makes sense.
I certainly hope so. And I think that's a real possibility out of the project of making time for one another, which seems to be the core of your answer.
You remember that part 2 of Coltrane's Love Supreme's resolution?
That's right.
We've got to resolve ourselves, tied to the pursuance. Resolve ourselves. Nothing will get in the way of our love of each other.
Yes.
We come from
a
people whose child could have been born in Virginia and got sold to Houston, Texas.
Yeah.
Never forgot about that precious little black baby. And as soon as you get free, if you got to walk from Virginia to Texas, you going to get that precious little girl.
That's right.
Resolve that nothing will get in the way of the love that we have for the people.
That's right.
And whatever it takes, we got to be improvisation, got to be flexible, protein and so forth, but whatever it takes. And I think that's part, again, of the great tradition that we started this dialogue with.
Absolutely.
Very much so. Very much so. But Sister Maya, you have teased out of us things that haven't flowed. I've been knowing this brother for 30 years.
Wow. I've been waiting my life to be in conversations like these, so I'm hoping I came prepared. I'm pleased to talk to you and grateful for your empathy and your patience and the time you're given to us. I think it transitions into this question of how we raise our Black children. I haven't been a child for a long time, but I was raised by Black people who love Black people, and who care for our souls and our intellects. And there is a question here about how we raise our Black children. So from William or Aureliana, it's how I feel raising my Black children. How do we negotiate our own radicalized trauma while trying to give enough sunscreen for our children to not get burnt in the white streets?
Wow. Yeah. You know, there's this wonderful line and there's this wonderful moment in the Uses of the Blues where Jimmy rejects a certain description of the Negro problem, right? He says, I don't know what people mean by the Negro problem, right? But what we mean by the Negro problem is that we got to try to keep whatever this world is saying about our children from taking root in them. Trying to keep whatever the world is saying about them from taking root in their spirits, in their souls.
Yeah.
Right? Those 1,000 cuts daily, right? Now, the interesting thing about it is that, but we have to be honest with ourselves. I have to be honest with myself. that my own trauma, my own wounds showed up in how I tried to raise my baby. Right? Because you bring, there's generational baggage. You bring it to the moment. And you love the best way you can.
That's right.
As fault, as vulnerable and full of fault as it may be, you love the best way you can. And it seems to me that to fortify them in that love, that as crazy as he may be, as broken as he seems, that Negro loves me to death.
Yeah.
And if they can come out of there, because if they can come out of that with that sense of love, then they have the armor. Because that black love is something else. They have the armor to deal with the world. But we got to keep it from. We got to keep the world from taking that. The detritus of the world from taking root, from settling in their spirits.
Yes.
And that's an ongoing battle. Does that make sense?
Oh, that's so powerful, though, brother. It's so true. One of the great moments in The Fire Next Time is in the letter to the nephew.
Yeah.
When Baldwin says, "Don't, comma, be afraid."
Yeah.
Don't, comma, be afraid. It's like
Yes,
a Marcus Garvey rally. Every Marcus Garvey rally, where they at? You got a black person saying, "The Negro is not afraid."
That's right.
Martin Luther King Jr. used to say what? "I'd rather be dead than afraid." So I tell my son, my dear brother Cliff, and my sisters, and my daughter Zaytune, two little precious ones, I say, you are so precious and priceless that the world might not understand that, but don't you ever be afraid to take a stand for something right. For the best of who you are. The best of what's in your mama and your dad and your grandparents. The best now. I ain't talking about the worst. I got a lot of gangster in me. Don't stand for my gangster side. No. Like Tupac. Hold off my thuggish side. Keep that loving side. That's what you stand for. Don't be afraid. Don't you ever sell out. Don't you ever cave in. Don't you ever give up. And that's exactly what Brother Eddie and Winnie done with Langston. Brother off Ivy Lee Brown, he still himself. He ain't afraid. You see what I mean? And it's part of the family, the community, the collegiality that he has. And it cuts, as we know, across color. Because, we got close brothers and sisters who love us.
Close partners, yeah.
Who are as vanilla as a stereotypical Norwegian. Hey, they keep the love flowing. It's real. It's real. Same is true with Brown, David Carrasco. Same is true with indigenous peoples and so forth and so on. You see, that's the caravan of love the Island brothers were trying to tell us about.
Doc, there's this line, just really quickly. I know there's this line, going back to the letter to my nephew. I just reached back and grabbed it because you said,
"Oh, you got it right there. You got it right there."
He said,
"Let me get closer. Let me get closer here, man."
He said, "To be loved, baby, hard at once and forever, to strengthen you against the loveless world."
Yeah.
That's what Seth says to Paul D. Either your love is too hard. No. Then he says, "Remember that. I know how black it looks today for you. It looked black that day too. Yes, we were trembling. We have not stopped trembling yet. But if we had not loved each other, none of us would have survived. And now you must survive because we love you and for the sake of your children and your children's children." That's what we're talking about.
Ooh,
right?
That's what we're talking about. And see, Tony just takes it off with that thick love she talking about and beat
exactly that.
Real thick,
love too thick.
Cookie like love. You know what I'm talking about? And keep in mind, this is not love of blackness in the abstract. This is love of black people individually. The ones who will cuss you out, the ones who will tell you off. They're worthy of being loved. You don't love them because you want them to love you back. Because there's no popularity contest. Every black person who fallen in deep, profound love of black people has been partly crucified by black people.
That's right.
Everyone.
That's right.
Malcolm to Martin to Marcus to Fannie Lou to Ella Baker to Harriet Tubman. But they kept loving anyway because their love was that thick kind of love. It wasn't this mamby-pamby quid pro quo. I help you, you help me, you love me, I love you. Can you imagine what our music would have sounded like if that's what they were saying about?
Right. Right.
Oh, Lord, have mercy.
I mean, thank you for that robust and joyful answer. Joyous answer to this question. That gets back to this, or that's a part of the idea of forgiveness, right? Like James Baldwin was, he had hated his father for reasons that people hate their parents, and then he chose to let go of that. Because of something you point out in the book, Dr. Glaude, where you say, without the, what is it? Is it the developing? Okay, well, anyway, he had let go of the hatred because he needed to, but also because what we're afraid of when we let go of a crutch is that we'll feel pain, right? So what you've given children is the ability to feel the pain and move through it, and then accept their parents as real, fallible human beings who deserve that thick kind of love. That's what we give to ourselves. And I think the gift of having a parent who is an adult while you are an adult, so that we can learn then to parent those of us who choose to. Thank you for that pivot. And I think one more big question.
Sure.
And then we'll...
Sure.
All right. This is from Nissan Searless. What do you think Baldwin would have to offer Black liberation organizers who are facing a deeply militarized police department and a resurgence of proud white supremacist violence?
Well, that's an interesting question. And I wouldn't dare try to suggest that I would be able to anticipate Baldwin's words in this moment. I would just, direct you to the wreckage, to search within his corpus, because I think he has language for us to speak to the moment. And he said they asked him this question in Esquire in 1968, and he said, they said, well, what would you say to the folk who are out in the street? He said, well, I wouldn't tell them not to get their guns. I wouldn't tell them, and I'm paraphrasing, I wouldn't tell them not to fight and to defend themselves. And I would say to them, and I'm paraphrasing here, if you're gonna kill that white man, if you're gonna blow his brains out, if you're gonna shoot him, which it may come to, he said, don't hate him, because the hatred will corrode the soul, Because at the heart of Jimmy's project, it seems to me, is a moral concern about who do we take ourselves to be, who do we aspire to be, right? How do we not allow the ugliness of the world to deform and disfigure, right, the soul, right, as we engage in this arduous task of self-creation, right, under these captive conditions. So what would he say? Fight to your last breath, because that's what he said. But do it in the name of love, not in the name of hate.
That's right. That's right.
Doc.
Oh, that's eloquence. That's wisdom speaking, my brother. That's wisdom speaking. And we could say, even though we should never speak for Brother Baldwin, that when he went to the heart of American apartheid, U.S. neo-slavery, terrorism, and trauma, called Jim Crow and Jane Crow, that's what he was up against. He got off that plane and that bus, and he walked into this militarized zone, lynchings and various vicious attacks and what have you. And first thing I think he accents is, how is it that Black folk are able to keep their souls intact? You see, that's a moral and a spiritual question. They didn't have a lot of political power. They didn't have a lot of economic power. They had a richness. They had a depth. They had a tremendous breadth of something cultural and moral and spiritual that actually made them morally superior than the white supremacists. Not because they were born that way, because their tradition under tremendous blood, sweat, and tears had produced them in that way. And that blew his mind, because see, he used to Harlem. And you know, the black version of urbanicity in Harlem is different than the black version of rural Mississippi. We all New World Africans, but we got different circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
The speed of walking and a whole lot of other things is going on there, you see. And so it blew his mind to encounter such a great people spiritually and morally under those kind of militarized conditions. That's the standards we have to keep as we move into the 21st century. And it's a very difficult standard because we've experienced, you know, strong moral decline in Black America because of the commodification and commercialization that Maya was talking about, and because the white supremacy so easily gets inside of us that we don't extricate it, as it were. But as long as we try to de-niggerize ourselves in the name of love, where whiteness or white people are not the point of reference. If you so obsessed with hating white folk, they steal your point of reference.
Yes.
You're in a world of trouble. You're in a world of trouble. You're still captive. You're still trapped. You see. Now, if you're loving white folk and not loving black folk, you're sick. You're pathological. It's true. And pathology, you know, is out there in
Real talk.
a number of different ways, you see. That's what it is to deniggerize yourself by means of the access to tradition. That's what our churches ought to be doing. That's what our mosque ought to be doing. That's what our synagogues ought to be doing. That's what our poets at their height do. That's what our musicians at their height do. You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. Come get this love so you never get niggerized in such a way that you forget that you're part of a great tradition.
Yes. Yes. So let us end there. I'm going to bring up the name of a great poet, Jericho Brown, who wrote a book called The Tradition, directly in response, I believe, to Mr. James Baldwin, who said, "Let's begin in love and end there." That is the last question here. You spoke about verb as a praxis, and we've just spoken to the notion of radical love and what it looks like and how it has shaped this movement. We begin in love and we end there. So thank you both so much for coming to speak with us. Thank you all for attending this Haymarket reading, and I hope that we'll see you at the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sister
Love
Maya.
you, Doc. Thank you.
And
Thank
brother,
you, Maya.
Brother Eddie, man, Brother Eddie. Woo. Lord have mercy. What a love warrior you are at the deepest level, man. And we're going to be faithful unto death. We made a covenant. We're going to go down swinging. We're going to go down. So I'll go down before him, but I'll go down with a smile on my face because I know the tradition continue on.
I love you to death, brother. Oh, my God.
Wonderful.
Love you to death, my brother.
Thank you both. Be so well. Take a